Lord, may the words of my lips and the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, because you are our rock and our Redeemer. Did you see her head hit that railing? Did you see when he hit her once and she flew back against the wall of the elevator and she came at him and he hit her again and her head hit that railing and she sprawled on the floor of that elevator? Did you see when he dragged her out by her armpits and when he picked up her clutch for her like he was some kind of gentleman? It's been everywhere you turn all week long, that video from a security camera in an elevator where Ray Rice knocks his wife unconscious and drags her into the hallway. She wasn't his wife yet then. She was his fiancée. She hadn't taken his name then. She had her own name in those days, but there it was. Did you see it happen? And did you see when the NFL claimed they had never seen that video before? Even though law enforcement officials, at least one, swore that he had sent it to them. It all started out so beautifully. It started out so good. There was so much love, and the future felt like it was opening out before them. It all started out so good. It always does. Joseph had come down into Egypt, and he had saved the Pharaoh's life. He had changed everything in Egypt, and so the Pharaoh raised him up high and gave him power, and he brought his family down with him. And there they prospered and they grew and the people loved and respected them. The Pharaoh gave them great honor, the story says. And then it started to go south. The relationship between the Egyptians and the Israelites started with belittling. Then they were mocking them. The Egyptians were so afraid of the Israelites. They felt so small in their presence. They were so mad. And suddenly it turned violent. There was the first time, and everyone hoped it wouldn't happen again. And then there was another time, and then there was another time. And soon nobody could ignore the bruises, the slashes on the backs, the dead among them. Nobody could ignore it, but they did try to hide it from the children. Don't they always? And if you were there and you wanted to make it 10 times worse for the Israelites, if you wanted to make it really bad, if you wanted to make them feel like it was their own fault, what you might have said to them then was, well, why did you stay? Because that's what they said to Janae Rice, you know. Why did you stay? Why did you marry him after you did that? After he did that to you? Why did you stay? Nobody asked that of the Israelites, though. We seem to be able to understand the reasons. That it was their home. That they had built a life there. That they had twined themselves together with the Egyptians and built all their hopes for the future on that relationship. That the kids were there. That they didn't know where they would go if they left Egypt. That it looked to them like the whole world was one vast desert. They didn't know how they would pay to survive. They didn't know how they would feed their children. And they knew this. They knew that if they ran, the Egyptians would follow them and maybe kill them. They'd cut off all their ties with everybody up home. This relationship, it was so intense. The Egyptians, they were just so controlling. They didn't even know anyone out in the world anymore. They didn't know where they would go. Nobody asks the Israelites why they stayed. We only ask the bruised ones lying on the floors of elevators. All this week, there's been this thing, #WhyIStayed. Have you seen this? A writer, herself a victim of domestic violence, she invited victims, survivors, overcomers of domestic violence to tweet their answers, to go on Twitter and say why it was they stayed when they stayed, and to mark what they wrote, #WhyIStayed. And the answers, the results, it was all the things I just said about the Israelites and more. But most of them, thanks be to God, most of them don't stop with #WhyIStayed. They go on to #WhyILeft. One of them says, #WhyIStayed, I wanted my children to have a father. #WhyILeft, I wanted my children to have a mother. And it's in the space, that space right there between why I stayed and why I left, that is the place where our God shows up with power. That is the space where people who believe in our God, who love our God, who try to be like our God, that's where we go hard. That's where Vera House here in Syracuse lives its life. Every moment of every day, they stand in that space between why I stayed and why I left, and they try to pry it apart. They're going to have an event here later next month. I hope you'll come to it. You'll hear more about it soon. There's lots of other ways to support their work as well, and the work of other organizations working to end intimate partner violence. They work right there in the space between why I stayed and why I left. And sooner or later, thanks be to God, sooner or later, we hope, sooner or later, thanks be to God, they get up off the floor, those bruised ones. They grab the kids. They don't have time to let their bread rise, so they get their unleavened bread. They put everything they own on a pack, and they head out across the sea. And it's like those things, why I stayed and why I left. It's as if they were piled up on their left and on their right, and a road stretched out from their feet toward the rising sun. And like a pillar of flame, God goes before them. And like a pillar of smoke, God goes behind them to protect them. And there they go, dry shod through the sea with our God. And if there are some Israelites that didn't make it with everybody else, the ones with sick kids, the ones who couldn't get their stuff together in time, the ones who weren't quite ready, the ones who were still held tight by the ones who kept them in slavery. If there are some Israelites still there in Egypt, here's what it's your job and my job to do. Not ask, why are you still here? But to say, how can I help you get out? Say amen.